What's going on, everybody? Welcome to my Overwatch League Power Rankings video for Stage 1, and I've noticed that a lot of content creators out there have been making their own Power Rankings list, so I figured I'd join in the fun and make my own list, but unlike a lot of the other videos you're going to see out there, I'm not doing a Power Rankings video just for the entire season in general. I'm doing one for every single stage, which means that at the beginning of each stage, you should expect a Power Rankings video from me. I'm going to be structuring my Power Rankings list a lot like how sports networks do with the NFL and the NBA, like with ESPN, for an example. That's just naming one, where you kind of take all of the teams at the beginning of the year and talk about which ones look the strongest, which ones look the weakest. But then as the season progresses, spots are going to change depending on how well a team does or how poor they do. Like, let's say one of the top 3 teams ends up going into a big slump, then maybe they'll go down to like the 6th or the 7th best team, and then maybe like the 8th best team moves into the 3rd best spot. That's really how I want to do it, based off of every single stage, because you never know who's going to get hot and who's going to go into this huge slump. Like, perhaps a really bad team that we're all thinking of maybe ends up doing a lot better than we expect. And maybe a team with high expectations, like let's say the Seoul Dynasty, ends up not doing too well. I don't think it's fair to just ignore when one of these things happens to a team. They deserve to move up or down depending on whether they did really well or really bad after a certain amount of time. Like, let's just say, for an example, and this may seem really dumb, but just bear with me, the NYXL are ranked number 1 in someone's power rankings for stage 1. Then in stage 2, they're also ranked number 1, even though in stage 1 they went like 2 and 7. I know that sounds ridiculous, but again, just bear with me. But then at the same time, the Philadelphia Fusion, or maybe ranked like 4th or something, have a perfect undefeated stage. Is it really fair to keep the Philadelphia Fusion under the NYXL when New York struggled so much but the Fusion did amazing? No, that'd just be ridiculous. That's why I think it's right to do things this way instead of just having one power rankings for the entire year. Okay, now that I've gotten that out of the way, the last thing I need to go over before I can get straight into this list is that I'm going to try and talk about all of these teams as briefly as I can, just because I could talk about a lot of these teams for a very long period of time, and if I don't filter myself and stop myself, it'll end up being way too long of a video. I mean, like 30 plus minutes. Plus, if you're really interested in hearing all of my in-depth analysis about a team, make sure to check out my How Good Is Your Overwatch League Team series, because I go into a lot of depth about every single team. The series isn't quite complete yet, but I promise you I will get around to doing the other teams very soon. Anyway, now let's move on to my power rankings list finally, and kicking things off at number 20, I have the Chengdu Hunters, and I'd say I have them on here basically for the same reason as everybody else. They're a very weak looking team, they lack star power, they also made some questionable roster acquisitions by getting guys like Bacon Jack, who decided to go pursue a career in PUBG and really haven't been part of pro Overwatch for a good year or so. The one good thing about the Hunters is that they're all Chinese, so communication won't be an issue, kind of like the 0-40 Dragons, which, you know, had both Chinese and Korean players in their lineup, but I don't think that communication's going to be enough to save them, just because, again, they're lacking the talent they need to be able to compete with a lot of the other rosters out there. Also, I'm not a biggest fan of their coach, because he was the coach of the Dragons, and yes, I know he's had some success in the past, kind of like with the 2018 Chinese World Cup team, where they were able to make it to the gold medal match and beat teams like Canada, for an example, and Finland on the way there, but I've heard stories about this guy. He's not a very nice dude. He's actually kind of a jerk. I've heard that he's overworked his players dramatically, and they only really get breaks during meals, and they don't really get enough sleep either. Those are some big time concerns to have, and these guys honestly look a lot like the 2018 Shanghai Dragons. I have so many concerns for this team, but I think I'm going to leave it there. You guys get the point. This team is not good, and they're probably going to stay that way. At the number 19 spot, I have the Washington Justice, and they kind of have the same issue as the Hunters do, as in they don't have a lot of talent working for them. I love the fact that they have the NYXL's former coach Wizard Young, who is regarded by most as an absolute genius. I think Janice and Otto could also be decent players, but the rest of the team has a lot of question marks. There's a bunch of unproven tier 2 talent. I know a lot of these guys have shown flashes, but I'm not quite sure if they're going to be able to do enough in the Overwatch League to secure a lot of wins for this team. But then there's also the fact that the stage 1 schedule for the Justice is very rough. It's hard for me to put them higher than number 19 in this stage just because of all the hard teams they gotta face. I mean, just listen to the schedule. The first game's against the NYXL. Their next is against the London Spitfire, then they face the Philadelphia Fusion, the San Francisco Shock, and even the Seoul Dynasty. That is rough. They only have 2 winnable games on here against the Paris Eternal and the Florida Mayhem, so I'm expecting this team to get at least 5 losses. There's a good chance they could go 0-7 in this stage. I think I could put them higher in my power rankings list later on in the year, because there could be some more winnable games for them, but as of right now, I'm going to have to put them at number 19. At number 18 is the Florida Mayhem, and this is just a bad team. I apologize, Mayhem fans. I will admit that they did a good job of identifying the fact that they needed to rebuild and that their team wasn't good enough. They were able to get a new support line, get some other new players that'll help out. But unfortunately, they didn't get any superstar level players or even star level players in general. So they were kind of just forced to settle with these average at best players. And that's not going to help you win a lot of games. I'm sorry, it's not. Then there's also the fact that your organization has been going through a lot of internal issues. I don't see the Mayhem doing too well unless a player can somehow step it up and carry even more than he did last year, which I highly doubt is even possible. Oh, and I almost forgot to mention, the Mayhem don't have any Korean coaches on their team. That is almost completely made up of Korean players. They did have one Korean coach, but they decided to get rid of him. I know he was kind of toxic, but still, now they're left in a situation where they don't have a single Korean coach to help communicate with their team and help form strategies. This is just a mistake waiting to happen. At the number 17 spot, we have the Boston Uprising, and they just received all sorts of downgrades during the offseason. They're looking like a very weak team. They lost so many key pieces that they had last year. Dream Casper got released from the team because of his allegations, and he's no longer in Overwatch League now, of course. They lost their superstar DPS striker and a really solid flex support player in Neko because they were both unhappy with the organization and how they were treating them. So now this team's just left in shambles. The support line's looking just meh. They have a really good tank line in Note and Gwangsoo that I think will help carry this team time after time this year, but the DPS situation is just so rough, and I don't know how they're going to be able to recover. At number 16, I have the Paris Eternal, and I actually don't think this team is bad at all. They're not amazing or anything, but I like some of the European talent that this team is comprised of. Guys like Soon and Shadowburn are going to lead the way, but guys such as Benbest and Cruz also intrigue me a lot, and I think they have a lot of potential, but the only problem is I think they lack the star power needed to compete with some of the other Overwatch League teams out there. I see this team being pretty competitive against the mid and low tier teams, maybe even some of the worst high tier teams, but other than that, I don't think the Eternal are going to turn too many heads. I don't see them taking out any of the juggernauts, but I think they're still a decent team nonetheless. Number 15 is the Houston Outlaws, and I mostly only have them this low because of the fact that they only made one off-season move, and it wasn't even a super relevant one for the meta currently with getting someone like Dante, who's a Tracer and Sombra specialist, so I'm not sure how useful he'll be during Stage 1 during this tank-heavy meta. Maybe later down the line it'll look like a really good pickup, but as of right now, I am really not liking the Outlaws all too much. It's clear that they needed some roster changes, and they failed to address that by only getting one player over the offseason. I will admit though, in a tank-heavy meta, the Outlaws could potentially be really scary. Having Muma on Winston or Reinhardt, then Coolmat on D.Va, and then Spree on Zarya, of course, could make for a very deadly combination. My number 14 spot belongs to the Gwangsoo Charge, and even though I have them rated this low, I still see them as a dark horse candidate that could make the stage playoffs, or maybe even the overall playoffs by winning the play-in tournament, and the only reason I actually have these guys so low is because of the fact that they have so many different nationalities on their team, and I'm not quite sure if they'll all be able to mesh together. They have people from South Korea, China, the UK, and even the United States. They're from all over the place, and I'm not sure how well they're going to be able to get along with each other. I know people are going to say they did pretty well against the Dynasty in their show match, if you want that as an example, but I don't take show matches all too seriously, so we're going to have to see how well they do in this stage, and if they perform as well as I hope they will, then they'll probably move up in my Stage 2 rankings. At the number 13 spot, I have the Toronto Defiant, and just like with the Charge, this is another one of those sleeper picks for me. I think they have a lot of potential and could end up surpassing a lot of people's expectations. I also love the fact that their key pieces are Overwatch League veterans. I think Neko, Envy, and Asher will do an excellent job of leading the way for the rest of their rookie players, but if I'm going to be honest, I am a little bit concerned about them for this stage in particular because Neko is going to be serving a 3-game suspension due to account boosting. So I think that Defiant could be looking at 3 straight L's to start off the season just because I see Neko as one of the best players on this team. They're going to be missing out on a key piece being their really good Zenyatta player. I see this team having a little bit of a bumpy start, but don't be surprised if they move up in my power rankings in the future because I expect them to do a lot better in some of these other stages. At number 12, I have the Atlanta Reign, and I was very tempted to put these guys a spot or two higher on my list just because they have Defran, who has so much potential. We know how dangerous he can be, especially if he's able to regain that top form during his selfless days, but they also have a lot of other high potential players out there like Kodak and Masa. Their tank line is also really scary. I think the Reign could end up being very dangerous if they figure things out, but on the other side of things, things could go super wrong if guys like Defiant end up exploding and just make everything a lot harder for their team with all the drama. We're going to have to see what happens. If the Reign figure things out, then expect them to be higher on my list in the future. At the number 11 spot, I have the Dallas Fuel, and kind of like with the Reign, I was tempted to put these guys a spot or two higher just because I really like a lot of the off-season moves they made. I think they did a pretty good job of bolstering up their team and filling up some of those holes they had by acquiring Closer and RCK, but my one concern about these guys is that they lack a true flex DPS player. Yes, I know that Zachary is going to be filling that role for them, but he's also known for his hit scan abilities, just like with Effect and AKM and Taimu. He's just like them. Sure, he can play an okay Genji, and we've seen him play Brigitte, but how well can he play on some of those other heroes that his team needs him on? I'm really not sure if Zachary's ready to just go out there and produce right away for his team. I know that he did very well on the Fusion University, I'll give him credit for that, but during the 2018 World Cup, he didn't exactly do all too well, and while I'm not going to just strictly blame the loss on him, I think he was a good reason why the US ended up choking that game away to the UK. He didn't exactly do all too great when he played Genji, Widow, Brigitte, or Zarya. He looked pretty weak on all of those heroes if I'm going to be honest. I'm not sure if he was nervous or anything, but he did not look like the same Zachary that I've seen on stream and on Fusion University. Also, there's always the chance that Effect could stir up more drama with all the stuff that's been going on with him the last year or so. I'm hoping that he's starting to get over that and he's ready to play, but you never know. He could end up exploding yet again. At number 10, I have the Shanghai Dragons, and I never thought I'd ever hear myself say that just because they were the laughingstock of the league last year. They went 0-40, but I'll be honest, this team is looking reasonably strong coming into Season 2. I like all the changes they made. They got rid of their Chinese players with the exception of Dia. They were able to replace them with more South Korean talent from Gwangsoo Panthera, which is a fantastic pickup because they are one of the best teams in the South Korean Tier 2 scene. The one issue with this team that keeps them from being higher up on this list is the fact that Fearless, their only main tank on the roster, is taking a step down for the time being, so other players are going to have to fill in and step it up. And I honestly don't know how well that's going to go for them. We saw what happened with the Dallas Fuel with the whole XQC thing and then OGE being suspended. It was a disaster with guys like Mickey and Taimu having to play main tank. It was horrible. I bet the Dragons are really regretting not being able to sign Roar from Gwangsoo Panthera and just watching him sign with the LA Gladiators instead, because they could really use him right about now. That's really the only complaint I have about this team though. The rest of the roster is looking reasonably strong, and I'm very excited to see the Dragons potentially finally get their first win here in Stage 1. At the number 9 spot, I have the Hangzhou Spark. I know this is a fan favorite, and they're also a pretty good team overall. I think this is a good team to like if you're getting into the Overwatch League. I think they have a lot of good pieces, especially with guys like Gushwei and Crystal from the Chinese World Cup team on their roster. They also have some other good Korean prospects. But speaking of Koreans and Chinese players being on the same team, here you go again. This is one of those concerns I have about this team that keeps them from being further up on my list. I don't like the fact that they have Chinese and Korean players. It makes it so much harder to communicate when you do that, especially when Gushwei and Crystal are arguably the two best players on the team. That's not exactly the best look, and I'm very concerned. You probably want to have two of your best players on the team in the starting lineup, right? I really hope they're able to figure out this communication issue, otherwise the Spark could be in for some trouble. But if communication ends up not being a big problem for them, then let me tell you, the Spark could be very dangerous. Like I said, they have a lot of good players with a lot of potential on this team, and I'm very excited to see what they bring to the table in this year's Overwatch League season. The number 8 spot belongs to the Vancouver Titans, and I can already see all of the hate comments now. How the heck could you have them this low? But just hear me out. I think that during Stage 1, they're going to have it a little bit rough. They just moved into LA like a week ago or something like that. They haven't been here for very long. They have to adjust to the lifestyle still. Then you have to factor in that they're also just practicing all the time. They're super tired. They don't know where they are. It's probably very stressful, and I think that's going to translate on stage for them. I do like the fact that they're made of the entire runaway roster. They're super strong overall. This is a team you gotta like and think that they're probably going to make the playoffs. But again, I think that the inexperience alongside the fact that they're in a new place that they're not used to with only one Overwatch League veteran on the roster is going to make for a little bit of a rough Stage 1. However, even though I think they'll struggle a little bit at the beginning of Stage 1, I think they'll figure things out pretty fast just because, again, they're made up of the former runaway roster. They're a really strong team. I think you'll see improvements as soon as they're able to adjust to their new lifestyle and they finally get used to being on stage. And once they figure things out, let me tell you, this is a team that no one's going to want to face. The number 7 spot belongs to the Seoul Dynasty, and they improved quite a bit during the offseason. They were able to acquire a superstar level main tank player Fissure from the LA Gladiators. They made some coaching adjustments, they got some new backup players, maybe even some guys that could see some stage time if things go their way. But I do have a few concerns about this team. I'm worried about how Toby will do when he isn't playing Lucio. I think during the GOATS meta he'll do just fine because his Lucio is god tier. He's so good on that hero. But his Mercy and Ana are a little questionable. I'm also a little concerned about Munchkin because, you know, he's not the best DPS player out there. I think Fled is great, but it's so hard to just carry the entire DPS as a whole when Munchkin doesn't always perform all too well. I know his Tracer is good. Well, I guess decent, but the rest of his heroes aren't too great, so I definitely have some worries there. Hopefully Toby and Munchkin are able to step it up, or perhaps someone off of the bench comes in and saves the day. I'm not exactly sure what's in store for the Dynasty, but I do think they're a stronger team than they were last year, and I don't think they're going to flop and disappoint everyone like they did in the previous season. At number 6, we have the LA Valiant, and yes, I know they lost soon, and that's a pretty big loss for them. Now they have Kareem filling in at DPS alongside KSF and Bunny, and they have a new guy, Izayaki, playing flex support instead of Kareem, but this is still a pretty strong roster overall. They have a good coaching staff, they have an insanely good tank line with Fate in space. Custa's a fantastic leader as well. I don't think there's all too much reason to worry about the Valiant if you're a fan of them. I still think they'll be a strong team. Maybe not quite as good as they were last year, but still pretty good nonetheless. At the number 5 spot, I've got the San Francisco Shock, and these guys are stacked. Maybe even a little bit too stacked if you ask me. But regardless of what I think, they're a really good team. Their DPS rotation is absolutely absurd, with a guy like Striker from the Boston Uprising, who's a superstar level DPS player leading the way. Then they also have Sinatra still, Baby Bay, Rascal, and Architect. That's just ridiculous. I don't even know how to explain how good and how stacked that DPS lineup is. And I'm honestly not sure how it's going to work with them, just because they could all realistically get time on stage. Although I'm sure someone like Krusty, who's a genius head coach, could end up figuring that out. Their main tank position, their off tanks, their supports, they're all really good. I'm expecting great things from the Shock this year. At number 4, I have the Los Angeles Gladiators, and yes, I know they lost Fissure, which is a big blow to their team, but they were able to replace him with a pretty good main tank and Roar from Kangdu Panthera, and they even picked up his friend Decay, who's a really good DPS player with a whole lot of potential. He's another solid hit scan player to go alongside Surefour. They of course also still have Hydration, Big Goose, and Shaz. Everything about this team is looking really nice still. I fully expect this team to be one of the most dominant in every single stage, not just in stage 1. I think they'll be among the top in all 4 stages. And you can disagree with me if you want here, but I see the Gladiators as a true title contender. At number 3, we have the Philadelphia Fusion, and yes, even though this team was very inconsistent last year, I think because of the fact that they made the grand finals and were able to beat the NYXL on the way to the grand finals, that those days are finally behind them. I think they have the confidence needed to finally be a consistent team. Also, I don't think Carpe will allow his team to be bad, just because he is easily one of the best DPS players in the world, and I think he has the chance to hard carry even more than he did last year, if that's even possible. I personally think Carpe is at the top of his game right now, and pairing him up with someone like EQO makes for one of the most deadly DPS duos in the league. I have some concerns about their main tank. I don't think Sato or Fraggy are all that good, but at least Poco's a really good off tank, and then Boombox and Neptuno both get the job done most of the time. With the Fusion being the runner-ups in the grand finals last year, I think it's fair to have them be in my top 3. Moving on from the Fusion, at the number 2 spot, we have the New York Excelsior, and I fully expect this team to dominate just like how they did last year. I don't see why they wouldn't. Sure, they lost their head coach, which is a big blow for them, and they lost Janice, who was an okay backup main tank. Mano was definitely better in my opinion, but they did add some new pieces, however, to make up for that. They got Flower and Nene, who both have a lot of potential. And yes, I know that Flower didn't do all too well during his time in Contenders, but all you have to do is watch the gameplay from 2017 when he was in the World Cup, and you'll remember just how good this guy can actually be if he's under the right circumstances. There's just so many things to like about New York. For one, I'd say for the most part, they're a pretty disciplined unit, maybe with the exception of Pine when he does those crazy flanks that sometimes don't end up working out for him, but they also, I'd like to add, have some of the best players in the world on their roster, and they have Jonak, the reigning Overwatch League MVP, who's the best Zenyatta in the world. He's basically a third DPS player. The dude's just so good at the game. I expect the NYXL to dominate a lot of the regular season games while making every single stage playoff, and I don't see why this team wouldn't be one of the best teams coming into the overall playoffs as well. Whether or not they choke it away has yet to be determined, but still, the NYXL are a threat. And finally, the moment you've all been waiting for. At number 1, I have the London Spitfire, and can you really blame me for putting them here? They're the current kings of the Overwatch League. They pretty much cruised through all of their games with the exception of one during the playoffs. They looked like the best team in the league during this time. You also have to mention the fact that they have guys like Gesture, Prophet, Birdring, Badoshan, just absolutely insane talent. What is there to not like about the Spitfire? The Spitfire even got some new players on their roster that could potentially help contribute in the future. Maybe they'll just be backups, I'm not quite sure. But regardless, this team is still unbelievably strong, and I don't see why they wouldn't be able to win the title yet again this year. They can compete against any of the other rosters in the league. Change my mind. And with that being said, that wraps up my Stage 1 Power Rankings list that I got for you guys today. Make sure to let me know what you think of this list down in the comments section, and feel free to leave your own power rankings down in the comments below because I'd love to read them and tell you guys what I think. And one more thing before I close things out, I apologize if this video seemed a little bit on the rush side. I really wanted to get it out before Overwatch League opening night, which is just 2 days before that day happens, by the way, at the time of me recording and hopefully uploading this video. And also, I didn't want to spend too much time on any one team just because, you know, this video would be so long, and I really hate making long videos because I know a lot of people prefer not to watch them. So yeah, that's my explanation as to why this video seemed a little bit rushed, if it did at all to any of you guys. So thank you all so much for watching today's video. I really do appreciate it. If you enjoyed this content, then make sure to hit that like button. And if you're new around here, consider subscribing and clicking the bell icon so you don't miss my next Overwatch League discussion video. And until next time, this is ATP, signing out. Peace.